Welcome back to Feed the Dark podcast. And this episode is very special because we're talking about the novel that scares me the most. And we also have a very special guest on, Lauren Jackson. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren Jackson, and I'm the one who told Evan to read this book in the first
This
place.
is very true. Yeah, thank you so much for that, by the
Oh,
way.
yeah. I
Because
told you what it would be like, though. I did give you a ton of warning.
I did have a solid amount of warning, although even so, even with all that preparation, I feel like I was still completely just blindsided. Even though we had multiple discussions about what this novel would be like, I feel like I still was totally unprepared for how this would affect me mentally. So that's why I'm so excited to talk to you about this. So, Lauren, is there any place that you'd want to plug, or any place the audience can find you?
Yeah. I'm actually coming out with a podcast. I know I've been saying I'm coming out with it for like a few months, but we actually have a bunch of episodes recorded. It's called
I know
Fandumb.
how that is.
Yes, it's called Fandumb, Fandumb, and it is an exploration of internet fan culture and
Mm-hmm.
all of the good, the bad, and the sometimes ugly that is found there.
Awesome. And
Yeah.
on what platforms are we going to be able to
We're
find
going to
you?
be releasing on probably SoundCloud just to get started, but
Cool.
we're hopefully going to move to different platforms after that.
Yeah, great.
Definitely.
But yeah. So actually, before I was going to start with a general plot. Before we get into that, would you kind of want to tell the audience what your first experience of reading this was kind of like, or how it made you
Yeah,
feel?
absolutely.
Cool.
So I first read this book back in 2007. I had just graduated high school. I was in my first semester of college, and one of my friends in my philosophy class was reading it. And I was like, "Oh, that looks really cool." And she was like, "Yeah, I got it at Barnes and Noble, whatever." So I picked it up and I started reading it, and I could not stop reading it. Um, I would finish it and then I would restart it again because I was really trying to find out what the meaning was. And it got to the point that I gave it to a friend who I am now rooming with, and I told him never to let me read it again because it was making me very crazy. Um, and just there's a lot of footnotes in the book, and I'm sure we'll discuss those. But I just started writing in the margins, and I reread it for the first time in like 13 years today, and
Oh
like
wow.
you can see all the characters slowly start uh having not great times. I was also having not great times along with them, as the randomness of my own footnotes can attest to. So the first time I read this, it affected me very strongly. And I was like a little nervous to reread it, to be honest with you. But luckily, the years have tempered my understanding of things, and I was able to get through it this time without a problem.
Yeah, no, normally I would actually kind of like cringe whenever anyone says like, "Oh, I write in the book," because I know a lot of book lovers love writing, in novels and stuff. I'm not one of those people, but for this specific one, I totally understand for reasons we'll get into. And I actually had an extremely similar reaction to you when first reading it. It totally like threw me off more so than anything else. But I mean, I really
Yeah.
do want to delve deeper into the themes and everything. But I guess we
Heck
just
yes.
give the audience a general, even, I mean, it's really hard to do because there are, multiple characters and storylines, but I guess we should do like a general plot overview just so people know what we're talking
Yeah.
about with here. Yeah. So, would you like me to do that, or,
We can do it
okay,
together.
cool. Yeah, that works.
Okay. So, I mean, the first character that we run into is Johnny Truant. And he is like a dirtbag from LA who is hanging out with Lude, his other dirtbag friend, and an old man has died in Lude's apartment. And that's how the book starts.
Yeah.
Um,
And then kind of from there, it sort of goes into a story within a story, which is, I mean, the interesting thing about this is it's not just a story within a story. It's more of it's like a documentary kind of style of writing.
yeah. So the old man's name is Zampanow, and there's no
Hmm.
other, like, he has no first name, no last name. It's just Zampanow. And when he died, he didn't leave anything behind except a trunk full of his writings about a documentary that does not exist. Fully cited, 100 million footnotes, um, but the books that he references often don't exist either.
Mm.
Um, so it becomes a bit of a, but some of them do exist. So right from the get-go, almost from the first chapter, you find yourself looking up these sources to find out like what's real and what's not.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, just that alone would be like an absurd amount of homework to do just for a book. But and then it goes even deeper. I mean, it tells a deeper story within that about the family that moves into his home. It gets into the actual film, and yeah, I mean, and then they discover that the inside is slightly bigger than the outside of the home, and that's where it becomes sort of more of a horror story than I think it was previously. And then all the rest of the stories become more of a horror story. But I from there it just goes absolutely bananas.
Yeah.
So
When
yeah.
my friend way back in philosophy class explained this to me, she explained it as, and then they come home one day and then there's a closet that wasn't there that's there now. And that
Mhm.
I remember that because it intrigued me so much because it was so unsettling. Like it shouldn't be. It's just a fucking room that's there when it wasn't, but it the idea of just you don't understand the dimensions of your own home even though you're there every day is really uncomfortable.
Oh, it's incredibly creepy how they build that up. I mean, I think it even starts out with just being like 1 or 2 inches
Yeah,
of a
it's a
difference.
it's
So
a
it's a
quarter
very
inch.
yeah, it's a
And
1/4 inch.
then
Okay, so yeah.
they measure it again and then it's 5/16, so it got a little bigger. Then they measure it
Right.
again and it's a foot.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't want to spoil it entirely to where it eventually goes, but in
Yeah,
my opinion, it goes into full horror territory, which so this is where I kind of want to talk about the concepts of horror because the author actually disagrees that this is a horror novel, even though I personally find it the scariest book that I've ever read, and I know it kind of got under your skin as well.
very much so.
He sort of yeah. I mean, I have a quote from the author, and he said that I had one woman come up to me in a bookstore and say, everyone told me it was a horror book, but when I finished it, I realized it was a love story, and she's absolutely right. In some ways, genre is a marketing tool. House of Leaves has also been described as a satire of academic criticism. So, I mean, I don't know. For me, I personally find it more of a horror story. But what's your take on that? And I guess just what defines horror as a whole, and if that fits into it, and why or
I
why not?
don't know if I can answer that without talking about the actual author's family
Okay,
because
we can get
I
into that
think
too.
the way that the author views it, it's definitely a love story, especially in light of his own personal life experiences.
Hmm.
Um, but as in many of our lives, what we take out of it is not often what others see in it. Like I can tell a story about my life and be like, "Oh, and then I was a stronger person for it." And the other person will be like, "That is one of the worst stories I've ever heard. That sucks." So it's interesting like how his perceptions of the book because a lot of what is in this book is the actual author's life and him trying to work out stuff in it. He can see it as a love story while the rest of us see it as horror because we
Yeah,
didn't
yeah,
have to live it. And it's hard to see how terrible things are when you're inside of them.
yeah. No, absolutely. That whole concept of perception is really really intriguing. I've never seen it. I've never experienced it. So um, I've never experienced such a obvious example of that before reading this book.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty intense. I mean, part of the reason why it messed with me so much, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but it's really just how the entire novel is presented. I mean, it's a very experimental novel, and I mean, there are certain words that are color coded.
Yes.
I mean, there are different fonts for different characters and different situations, and I mean, how did that play a role in your experience of a novel? And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Especially because you get to a point in the novel where you are flipping the book around and you're so disoriented by what the text is saying that it's very hard to understand any of it, especially because the parts that are the most difficult to read um, physically are also the parts that are most difficult to read um in terms of their content. A lot
Mm,
of it is like the first time I read it when I was a kid, I thought it was very deep. Um, but the second time I read it, which is now, and I'm a teacher who's edited a lot of essays, it's a lot of navel gazing nonsense. And the author actually like knows that. He's lampshading it. So the idea of it as like a critique of academic writing, I believe is very understandable because
yeah.
there are whole parts of it that aren't really necessary to the understanding of the plot. They're there to obfuscate things. And the extremely complicated sections are definitely trying to do that.
So just real fast, because this book took me like 3 or 4 times to actually start it before I really got into it. I mean, the first 100 pages or so, I had to, yeah, start 4 times because I found it incredibly difficult to actually get into. Now it's one of my favorite books of all time. But
Oh
so you
yeah.
started this when you were younger. Did you like just jump right in and finish all of it right away? Because
Hmm.
that's
It probably took me
incredibly
like maybe
impressive.
2 days to read it the first time, and
Wow.
then w- I wasn't exactly reading it all the way through all the other
Hmm.
times. Um, there's a lot of footnotes, and they send you to different places in the book. And my first time through it, I didn't really go through the maze of footnotes and appendices. The
Hmm.
second time I did, like the second time I did, and I was on forums, like um, figuring out some of this book's secrets. And the more I did that, the more obsessed I got with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how to completely explain this book. I mean, it has like a billion annotations. I mean, there's a section towards the end where like certain paragraphs are kind of puzzles where you have to find out each sentences within like this massive wall of text. So, I mean, there's no way, at least that I can like fully articulate just how intensive a read this novel
Yeah,
is
I mean,
without just like actually showing it to someone. But
if you could write a maze as a book, this would be it.
oh yeah, no, absolutely. So, but actually, yeah, as I was saying before, the first 100 pages were difficult, but after that, for some reason, I guess I kind of like my brain kind of changed, and I got used to just the even when they threw more stuff at me, my brain just kind of altered to a way where I was able to read this kind of text. I mean, yeah, in the beginning, there were sections where I had to like where they make you read like the first half of each page and then flip back in the bottom half. So it's really like a training exercise. It's
Also like at the time, like I said, like I was in college, and I went to school for history. So
oh, interesting.
Chicago style annotations, which is what this is something that I had been doing for a long time. So I
Hmm.
think if you are in academia, or if you're like a college student, it's a little bit easier to get into it at first because it resembles so much of what you're reading already. Um
Okay.
as opposed to like if you're reading novels, and then to go to this is
Yeah.
it's not really in a novel format. um there's stories happening in the footnotes.
Yeah, no, so I studied English and I mean I guess we had annotations just on like,
Yeah, there's
on academic
MLA,
papers and
so
stuff,
it's
but
not
yeah, but
quite the same
I
thing.
yeah, exactly. So I guess if you want to talk more about that and how your experience in studying history kind of trained you in reading this or
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
also a big fan of Terry Pratchett. I don't know if you've ever read
Okay.
any Terry Pratchett stuff.
I'm
um
embarrassingly unfamiliar.
that's fine. Terry Pratchett
Uh,
is famous for his footnotes. He will have whole stories happening in the footnotes while other things are going on in the regular text. So I think a
mm,
combination of like knowing that if you're reading like I don't know, if any history book that's done in Chicago style, or any essay, like when I wrote my thesis, I had to do all Chicago style annotations. It's just like a flick down the page, and then you read the little annotation. Half the time you don't even, but if there's more there, you tend to read it more, and you tend to notice it more. And like I said with Terry Pratchett, he would do that all the time, where he would
mm.
put other things and very funny jokes. There are not very many funny jokes in House of Leaves, but
No, it's
um,
yeah.
I think the more that you read those style like of books, the more comfortable you get with it. I can definitely see. I mean, I remember picking it up at Barnes and Noble the first time and flipping through it and going, "What? What is this?" Um,
I was pretty nervous when I opened this up when it got from
yeah.
Amazon after you get recommended. I was like, Jesus Christ, what the hell, Lauren? But
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, I told you.
But so do you think that we'll get into themes, I guess now, because do you think that how the story was kind of, or how this novel was organized, is that kind of um kind of tie into like any of the themes, or kind of make those any more,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Like
illuminate any of those a little more? Yeah, because
um we were discussing this a little before we hit the record button, but this book is about shifting perceptions. And the book kind of gaslights you as a reader. For those of you who don't know what the term gaslighting means, it's a term that is usually used in reference to emotional abuse, where people try and make you feel like you're crazy because their opinions or values or um, instructions are constantly changing. So you're like, but you said to do this, and they're like, no, I never said that. I never did that. This book does the same thing to you as a reader, where you think one thing is true, and then you turn the page, and it's not at all what you thought it was. So you start to question your own perceptions of reality and your own perceptions of how you are as a reader. Are you reading poorly, or is the book changing? And without giving too much away, the impermanence of things and perceptions is a very big theme in the book. We have several unreliable narrators talking about something that doesn't exist, so it can kind of be whatever they need it to be for their own lives at that point in time.
yeah, to an extreme degree. I mean, I don't want to give anything away, but there's one specific unreliable narrator who goes on a rant for a couple pages about a very violent encounter that you believe the whole time is actually happening, and tied to what you were saying, it just doesn't happen at all, or not in the way that he presented it. And he kind
Yeah.
of says that in his own speech, and I mean, it's a roller coaster. But
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And you think there's like one small hint very early on that he's not an unreliable narrator.
Mhm.
And then he just tells you that he is not reliable at all. And then you question everything that you read in all of his footnotes beforehand.
Right.
Um,
I mean, especially because he comes across as, I mean, he's not to draw too much judgment on him, but he's a bit of a despicable person. But
oh
at the same
yeah,
time, but at the same time, you're sort of following his story, so you're still invested in what he's saying. So I
yeah,
mean, yeah, to go to your point about gaslighting, it really presents it in a way, at least in my opinion, that's like super unique.
oh yeah. And
Yeah.
because like he is very smart in the book, like the character is very smart. He's choosing to live in a way that doesn't really let him show that to the world, but because he is so smart, you want to trust him and you want to believe what he's saying. The
Mhm.
same way you want to believe what the old man wrote down with all of his constant footnotes. But the book is definitely making a comment about just because someone has read all these books and speaks all these different languages and can draw all these connections doesn't mean that everything that they have to say has merit. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean that we should follow them blindly without questioning a lot of what they say. Like, especially on this read through, um, a lot of Johnny's escapades with various women are extremely unrealistic. And I
Yeah.
think I'm pretty positive they don't happen and he's making them up.
Oh, I'm
Um,
with you. I mean, I read
because
this as an almost 30-year-old man, and I guess I had a different perspective as when you read it when you were much younger. But yeah.
yeah, like, I didn't have as much of a questioning perception as I do now, and I'm like, honey, this didn't happen. Like, this is you copied this from like a porn that you saw.
Oh, even
Like,
yeah, even from a male perspective, I agree totally.
no, yeah,
Yeah.
women don't do this. This isn't.
Yeah.
I know it's L.A. I know it's L.A. But women aren't like this. I hate L.A. Sorry, I
Yeah.
need everybody to know that.
Oh, yeah, yeah, we're leaving that in, by the way, but
Oh
yeah.
yeah, I lived in San Diego for a little while, so
Mm.
I went to L.A. several times, and I was like,
Oh, so you think this is an accurate representation of no, I'm kidding,
oh,
but,
yes, yes. LA is just it's full of scumbags,
Mm.
um, and fake people. Which
Oh,
is, I know that the author lived in LA for a time, and I'm sure that that had an effect on him.
I guess that's, yeah, that's an an appropriate experience for you to have. But just to circle back around, I know we kind of touched upon the concept of horror a little bit before, and how
Yes.
the author disagreed. So how do you define horror? And like, I know that the author kind of had different experiences, and it was interesting that we have different perspectives. But I mean, this is so far removed from what I would consider a romance that, like, I know that. I mean, I don't even know how he got to that conclusion. I mean, I we'll get into his family in a second, but I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
It yeah, we'll definitely talk about that. It's definitely horror to me. It kept me up at night. It made me really unhappy and unsettled. Hallways freaked me out for a little while, like dark
Yep.
hallways at night, like when you're going down the dark hallway to the bathroom at night.
Mm,
That was scary for me. I had to sleep with the lights on for a couple of nights. That's horror. If you're unsettled enough that you're uncomfortable in spaces that should be comfortable, that's
mhm.
horror. It's meant
Yeah, no,
to, create some kind of negative emotion within you.
no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, but unreliable narrators. I think that is messing with your brain. And
Mhm.
I mean, I've recorded a few episodes before here where I kind of discussed how personally I think the paranormal kind of scares me a little bit more than serial killers, even though I have Halloween behind me. I love serial killer stuff, but I think the paranormal for me kind of gets under my skin a bit more. So I definitely consider this to be a total horror novel, even if I disagree with Mark here. But now I do want to talk about his family a bit more, because I know you're definitely more knowledgeable about this than I am.
Um, yeah, so Mark Danielowski, I don't actually know how to pronounce his last name.
No,
Um,
that's why I didn't introduce the author's name, because I
yeah,
was
we're
going to
just like
botch
the
that. So
author.
yeah,
Okay. It
I called him
is
Mark once. So
Mark Z. Danielowski. Maybe I'm really sorry. I'm really bad at Polish names. I'm sorry.
oh no,
Um,
me too. I'm the host here, and I didn't even attempt it. So you're better than me. Yeah.
him and his sister grew up much in one of the characters in the book sometimes serves as a self-insert for the author, and more often he's a self-insert for the author's father. um, the family was him, his sister, and his mother and his father, and they moved around all the time because their father was an avant-garde Polish filmmaker. And if anybody knows anything about the book, that will sound rather familiar to you. Um, he moved them around all the time. They didn't really have like what could be considered a home. I think they had like eight. They lived in 8 different countries by the time like both of them were 6.
Mm,
So when they eventually did like they settled down in Utah where they started going to school, and things fell apart very quickly. His sister moved to New York when she was 16 and was like living in a squat, um, trying to like get back with her, like rekindle a relationship with her mom. And his sister is actually the singer Poe. Any woman who was alive in the 90s probably knows who Poe is. She sang the song Angry Johnny, which also, if you read the book, that has a meaning for you. And their art, him and his sister's art, are a call and an answer. um, House of Leaves and her album Haunted about their father's death and how they coped with that, because it's very clear, much clearer from Poe's music, because she goes into stuff in a little bit more detail than from Mark's writing, because it's much more esoteric and hard to get through, that their father was not a very nice man. He was a very difficult person. Um, I know Mark has a story about the what became House of Leaves was a short story that he wrote on his way to see his father on his deathbed. And in his head, he's like, okay, like this is the last time I'm going to see my dad. I'm going to write this story. He's going to read it. And I don't know what he expected to happen, but his dad read it and was like, maybe you should be a postal worker.
mm.
And like, that's what you're going to leave your son with?
That's
And he, yeah.
Jesus.
So he
Yeah.
tore it up and he threw it in the dumpster, and his sister literally went back and pasted it together for him. Um, it's
I was actually about when you first started. I was going to say, oh, that illuminates the fact that this is actually sort of a novel that is more about grief. But as you kept talking, I was like, wait a minute, no, now I have it. So it's kind of interesting. I could kind of see my
Yeah.
mind shift as you were talking to what this book is about. But
Yes.
yeah, she's.
Um, and I know that you said you listened to Poe's album that I also told you to listen to.
Thank you, by the
Her
way. It's a great album. I
It's a
listened to that
really
earlier
good album.
today. Oh, it's awesome. I mean, I'm a metalhead, but this is still right up my alley.
Yeah,
So yeah,
it's very visceral. It's
yeah. Oh no,
very
you could feel it. Yeah, for sure.
yeah. And it again tells a lot of the song titles and what happens in the songs are references to the book, or the book is references to her song titles because they were kind of written at the same time. She actually used to edit her brother's song like writing.
Oh, I that's new
Yeah.
information to me. That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah, she was his editor for a little while, and she was actually friends with the literary agent that eventually got this book published. Like she was the
Hmm.
one who like went to bat for it.
Oh wow, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
so
Yeah.
it's very cool to have that kind of relationship with your siblings. It
No,
kind of
that's
seems
awesome. Yeah.
yeah, like in their childhood, like they only had each other, and from a lot of the writing, uh, who I think is supposed to be like a baby Poe,
Mm.
it kind of implies that they were adrift with only each other for like company because their parents were just not emotionally available to them. But
Yeah, no, I want to ask you about this off camera because I actually don't even know who it would be because in my opinion, at least from just remembering this, I feel like most relationships or pretty much every single individual relationship, unless I'm forgetting something, is pretty fucking toxic. I mean, like
yes,
there's a mother son relationship and even like a familial relationship, friendships. I could see the father aspect in a lot of different individual relationships, but I'm excited to talk to you about this about who you think the sister is because I am once again, unless I'm forgetting a character, I mean this is just like a novel of just botched relationships in my opinion,
yeah, yeah.
at least at
It
first glance, and like, once again, unless I'm not digging deep enough, but
yeah. We can definitely talk about this off camera.
yeah,
Like I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but
yeah, of course.
so the reason that their father died in the early 90s, and when they were going through all his stuff, they found a box of tapes that he had recorded for them years and years and years ago.
Mm,
And if you heard in Haunted, the album, all those spoken word parts where a man is talking, that's their father.
wow.
Yeah. So hearing the voice of your dead father talking to you um, definitely is going to evoke a lot of feelings. And you're
Jesus,
going to
I
deal
gotta
with
listen to
those
that album again
feelings
now.
through art. Yeah. So,
That makes it way more intense than I even initially like. It was
yes.
intense when I first listened to it, but oh my god,
Yeah.
yeah.
And what I think is really beautiful about both the book and the album is that they both give this is a small spoiler, so if you don't want the book spoiled, skip the next like minute and a half. Um they
Mhm.
both give a much nicer ending to their art than I think they ever got or anybody in their family ever got. So that's the only way that I consider it a love story is that he does give a happy ending to
Okay, I think I know. Okay, yeah,
yeah,
I kind of connected some
it's
dots
because
here.
they
Okay,
have a
makes
happy
sense.
ending the way I am certainly positive um the relationships in his life did not.
Yeah. Okay, that's definitely wow. Yeah, no, I'm very excited to re-listen to that album. I definitely, obviously learned this as well. Recommend that everyone check that out along with the book. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much for recommending the book and this novel. I mean,
You're
and
so
this album to
welcome.
me because that was awesome. So, I mean, I guess that's mostly what I had. I was gonna ask you specifically if you had any opinions on what the colors meant in the color coding or why you use specific text for different characters. But actually, yeah, I'll ask you that because whenever so in this novel, whenever they say the word or write the word house, it's in
In
blue,
any language,
and in any language,
which I
yeah. I
think is
mean,
fun.
and there was do you think there were any reasons for the specific formats for different parts? I mean, there's another section where they have some annotations in boxes, and then you see a reflection on the next page. Or,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
Like I said before, that part, which is particularly terrible, and I can show it if you guys want. It's
yeah,
not fun. This is what it looks like. Very
it's
bad.
intimidating, super intimidating.
It is. It's awful. what he's
Yeah.
talking about there is just a bunch of like nonsense about the study of film critique. It has nothing to do with the characters. It has nothing to do with anybody in the story.
It's fucking
There are
mean.
some parts where Johnny goes on his little tangents, but like it doesn't matter at all. And I think he's like he said before, genre can be a marketing ploy. It's a lot of there's much more meaning in the pages that are mostly blank with a few words on them. Um, they create a sensation of space and depth that a
Mm.
lot of the characters are experiencing in what they're actually going through at the time. Whereas those very claustrophobic pages are like they're there to make you feel stupid and confused and unsettled, especially because of the what happens afterward.
Yeah, no, I think I confused my mom while reading this because I was on the couch in her den, and she saw me like kind of
And you're like
shifting
turning the
the
book
book all the way around.
around.
She's like, what the fuck are you doing?"
What
And
are you
yeah, and
reading?
yeah. She's like, "Why did it take you 3 days to read like 4 pages, and there's only like one word on this page I'm looking at?" So yeah, no, that's interesting. But no, I agree. It definitely did create a totally different kind of feeling than just a straight narrative.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I mean,
100%.
yeah, so that was mostly everything that I wanted to talk about because everything else I'd want to say would sort of be a spoiler. But I
Yes.
know that you've studied this for a bit. Was there anything I missed? Any specific other themes or
Not
history of the book that yeah?
mm, not anything that we can talk about without spoiling a lot of things.
Okay, that's
No,
totally fine.
I definitely think you hit upon a lot. And the more that you understand about the family, the more you understand about the book.
Mm,
Um this is definitely a self-insert author, but he self-inserts himself into like four different characters.
yeah.
And some characters are always supposed to be him, some are supposed to be him and his dad. Um, yeah, it's rough.
Okay, so yeah. Once again, thank you so much, Lauren, for coming on. This has been an awesome discussion. You've been
Heck yeah.
incredibly knowledgeable guest, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk about
Sure.
this. And
What else
also
am I gonna do? It's a quarantine outside.
That's true. We're still
Thank you for
recording in
sitting in
quarantine.
your house and
Yeah.
doing a
Thanks
thing.
for going all the way to your desk. I
Yeah,
appreciate it. But
I had to cancel so many things. I had another 4 Skype calls and
oh, same. Yeah, I was gonna go to the beach and
oh
just hang out with a
nice.
ton of people. I had to cancel 4 concerts tonight. Yeah, it was so I no, but
Oh,
seriously, thank you so much again. I
you're
do
so
appreciate it.
welcome.
Uh, but yeah, thank you guys again for tuning into Feed the Dark podcast. You can find me on YouTube, Lipson, Spotify, and Apple Music. Thank you guys.